Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today is Jason Bermas. Jason Bermas is a documentary film producer, perhaps most well known for his involvement with Loose Change, but he also has several other documentaries such as Shade and Invisible Empire. Jason, welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I know we've been back and forth for years via Twitter and other methods, but we've never really talked in person. So I thought this was a nice little opportunity. I've seen your stuff on Rogan. I've been to Metabunk. You know, there are certain things I absolutely agree with you on, and I think this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, I've been interested. I've been following you for a long time, and we've kind of crossed paths on a variety of things, like everything from 9/11 to chemtrails.
Sure.
Over the years, and other various things that I'm interested in and you're interested in, but we're kind of coming at it from different sides of the topic. You're more of a conspiracy theorist, and I'm more of a debunker, which both terms have kind of negative connotations on both sides. But do you describe yourself as a conspiracy theorist, or do you have opinions about that term?
I know that's the big thing, but for me, as like a conspiracy theorist, I guess I feel like I'd have to be putting more out there, or there's plenty. I mean, we could talk. I'm sure we will. We'll talk about To the Stars Academy, UFOs, for instance. That was something that was, when I was a kid, I got interested in, and with everything that was out there, the alien autopsy, Fox was pushing it. There's like 12 channels at the time. I remember I had the Time Life series. And one of the things that put me off on that Time Life series was that a lot of it had to do with paranormal, right? So you get like ghost ones and the psychic ones, et cetera, et cetera. And I was more interested in, seeing pictures of maybe craft that I hadn't seen before. And the big push then were aliens. But, through my research over the last 20 plus years, there's very little, if any, evidence of extraterrestrial life. And there's plenty of evidence for, black craft. In other words, black budget vehicles that aren't shared with the public for some time and trying to get there. And I thought that Annie Jacobson's book, I don't know if you read Area 51 yet, but to me, it's a must read. She did Rogan's podcast as well, but she has two other books, and they're DARPA and they're the other. DARPA's the Pentagon's brain, and she did one on Paperclip too. I'm interested in all those things. And she comes at it on a take, for instance, that Roswell, and not that I agree with her or know that it's true, but I thought it was interesting, that Roswell was actually Stalin who had gotten the craft technology that Nazis had worked on, specifically the Horton brothers, and he had crashed that craft there with genetically modified humans. And throughout the book, other than just Area 51, how it was created by the CIA, et cetera, it talks about the experimentation the Department of Energy and others were doing on human beings that Clinton would later, go public about and at least talk about some of it. So, those are the type of things that are really interesting. You before we went live, you said you'd watched Invisible Empire. I'm sure you think some of that is inflated, and we can get into it. But to me, there is, no matter, I don't think a bunch of people sit at a table and they're like, New World Order time. That's not how the world works. But I do think there are driving forces out there that meet, that collude, that are pro-globalism, and they often use that term. And when you get to that term, what is it? Even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I put it in, the intro of my film, talks about Hitler's version of it, and it's the regimentation of all human beings. And I do see a push for that, Mick.
It was interesting, like, in Invisible Empire, you talk about New World Order. You talk about, you have this kind of collage at the start that's about 20 minutes long of every single instance of New World Order that you could possibly find on the internet.
I would say not, because if you go to the credits on that, that there's an even longer collage. And I think even then I didn't put, and this is, when I made that film in 2010, it was actually a lot harder to get those video clips, For instance, C-SPAN is one of my biggest sources. Vanderbilt Archive was another place I was going for news archives.
You need transcripts.
Yeah, exactly. I would have to go through transcripts and kind of hope I'd get a video clip or something, especially with Vanderbilt. They would only give you a synopsis. They would not give you the full transcript of the thing. Yeah. So, I was rolling dice. And with that, before I get into the quote montage, which I think is about five plus minutes, I talk about a guy named Samuel Zane Batten, right? And his book from the early 1900s called New World Order. And he comes at it as more of this Christian perspective, but when it gets down to it, in that book, and anyone can get the PDF, it really is about collectivism. Now, again, it takes that spiritual context, it's pro-Christian, etc., but it talks about, again, this one world order. So my point being that, the more and more, say, we talk about China being bad, right? They have a driving technological force where they are trying to control their people through a social credit score and surveillance, right? We should be against that. But at the same time, they've been westernized. They're wearing, our style of clothing. They have K-pop all around. They've kind of integrated. And at the same time, on our end, although we've been westernized, we take more and more of this track trace database technology. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. I thought one of the more interesting things you talked to Rogan about was deepfakes. And I think that's a subject that is super interesting because, like you said,
definitely up and coming.
Yeah,
well, major issue.
I never thought it would get to the level it is now. In other words, snap. Yeah, and I always thought it would. I mean, I know that you're a programmer. I find that super interesting. By the way, Tony Hawk. Did you work for Neversoft? Is that who the company?
I was one of the co-founders of Neversoft.
That's a pretty cool thing, and that's the other thing, Nick. I feel for you because everybody wants to throw out, he's an agent, he's this, he's that. And I'm like, look, I've talked with the guy enough. I've seen enough. I don't know what your private life is like, but I know that we all have them.
It's like this.
Yeah, exactly. And, I know it's been thrown at me that I'm a disinformation agent or I work for this or I'm a shill. And I'm just a regular guy trying to make it and point out things that I think are interesting and important. And you made a cultural phenomenon at one point being Neversoft. I mean, that was Tony Hawk's 1 through 4 and even into Underground were huge games. They were huge.
Those are the ones that I worked on. I actually left after Underground.
Yeah, I didn't all those. And 3 was I tell you what, man, 3 was the one that it got me into it was a great soundtrack, got me into AC/DC when that was kind of in the background, and the Dropkick Murphys especially. So kudos to you. And at that time, what was that, late? I think the first one I picked up, Tony Hawk 3 was got to be 98 or 99, got it with a GameCube bundle or whatever.
Yeah.
Times seemed a little more simple. We had the birth of the internet. For instance, we were just talking about UFOs and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. In those 90s, it was the first time I had access, say, to PDF files of the Majestic 12 documents that obviously, I don't believe are real, but I could read them, I could read the MK Ultra documents for the first time.
So were you interested in that type of thing like before 9/11? Because you talk about the Invisible Empire, how 9/11 was kind of like a wake-up in a way.
For me, I bought into the official version through, probably the first 6 months to a year. I had questions on that day. Just looking at the buildings going down, and I, guess we'll talk about that Ron and Sana clip in a minute. But overall, my biggest concerns were when I woke up. I worked late night in that time. I was working at a pizza shop, I think, till 4 or 5 in the morning. So by the time I woke up, my roommates, they're all Long Island kids. You know what I mean? They had to drive through the city. I'd been in the World Trade Center. I'm a New York guy. I used to go to Brooklyn all the time as a kid. They're epic. Even anywhere you were in the boroughs, man, you could see them and you just kind of stare at them no matter what.
I remember
so, I get the impact. My roommate comes in. He tells me the towers are gone. Doesn't really register. Yeah. I go downstairs. I watch about 10 minutes of footage, and I'm just like, okay, well, this is, I don't know if I can curse, but it was just I was just like blown away, right? Let's say it that way. And I walked out my back door, and another one of my neighbors, who was a Long Island kid, this is a little college town, he's already cursing out Bin Laden in the street, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting up now, and how would they know? And just that kind of turned me off, but. It was the birth of the 24-hour news network. CNBC, I don't know that was around. MSNBC was around. Fox News was around, but it wasn't big. There was maybe 60, 70 channels you could get. Not what you could get.
It was 24 hours coverage after that. That was something I really remember about it. Everything on the TV. Yeah. You couldn't.
Everything.
VH1, to
Nickelodeon. Well, at least the first week. I remember it was a big deal when they went live with Letterman. I remember that was the big deal. I remember a lot of this stuff because it was just such a change and a flip. And honestly, that was kind of my birth into being a news junkie, right? To start following all of these different things. And I specifically remember, man, it's so hard to find now. I want to say it was Chris Hansen but it was basically one of these backdoor arms deals that was going on with a Pakistani that was an investigation of. And I found that peculiar, but, you know, again, that didn't register with me that there might be something more than what the TV was telling me about 9/11. And really the first time I was introduced to the conspiracy was when Fox and Friends was trashing Thierry Mason's book, Le Penegate. And even I was just extremely upset. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, F that guy. I can't, all the French will say anything. And so it wasn't until even after that I really started questioning everything and started, I guess, downloading a bunch of just archive footage. That's what really set me off. When I started downloading the archive footage, you know, there was a specific event that did that, but I read two I'm not going to give the story on, you know, what triggered me to do it, but I read two different big websites at the time. It was 911standdown.net and there was 911timeline.net, not the big timeline that's out now, but it was just a 24-hour synopsis of the day, you know, from 12 a.m. to 12 a.m. And there was a short little paragraph about our military budget, how many people were on the plane, some things to get me start questioning, and that's what set me off on that, Nick. And I got to tell you, I know it's highly contested today, but even now, 18 years later, we're starting to see at least the Saudi financing come out, right, and lawsuits there. I don't know how familiar you are with the Dark Overlord data dumps.
Oh, I've heard of them, but I didn't really. Is that where it was like some litigation talk, like basically investigations,
it's
liability?
Not just Silverstein, but, you know, Silverstein's properties, that's a big part of it, right? Mm-hmm. But one of the bigger parts of it for me is the family members and their depositions. And one of the bigger depositions, I mean, there's actually talk of the Pakistani ISI funding in a couple of the documents. I've gone over that, you know, the General Mahmoud Ahmed transfer and whether they're going to sue there. Remember, there's still two parts that haven't been released, you know, which are supposedly have the more damning information. Mm-hmm. Whether it does or not, I don't know. But my most interesting was the James Woods testimony. You know, if you watch Fabled Enemies, he had talked about how he had been on a flight prior and said that he had identified the hijackers and filed a report. So to me, I mean, the biggest one in this is that it gave a date. It was, I believe it was mid-August that this had occurred. It was Flight 11, you know, and Khalid al-Mihdhar, who especially now is kind of in the spotlight because he's the one that was funded by the Saudi, one of the two, right, was on that plane. Now, Mihdhar doesn't hijack 11. He ends up, I believe, on 77, right? But he's also one of the ones that's alleged to live with and rent from an FBI informant. So you should read the transcript yourself. It's out there for anybody. For me, when you have a Hollywood star in first class taking a stewardess over, having the pilot come out, having them all file reports, having that, if you listen to his testimony, he claims, I forget what the FBI agent's name is, but he names an FBI agent that says, yes, all those things were filed. And then he also claims that Seymour Hersh also verified that all three of those complaints were filed. And they were talking about these guys hijacking a plane 3 weeks before.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting story. I don't know the exact details, but I remember talking about that and people saying it's generally accepted that was kind of a dry run for the 9/11 attacks. What's your personal view on where do you draw the line on conspiracy theories in terms of some people they don't think a plane hit the Pentagon and things like that? I mean, I wouldn't think you obviously go that far, but like things like controlled demolition of the towers. Where do you stand on things like that?
I mean, you know how I feel about 1, 2, and 7. Especially in, I don't want to go, I'm not a physicist. I think the guys at architects and engineers have done a great job. I watched not the latest presentation, right? I read through that, but it's got to be like 18 months ago, a former NIST employee did like a 35-minute breakdown after leaving NIST and talking about how much he loved that organization and how he was kind of taken aback when he started asking questions about 9/11. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I'd like to share that.
Yeah, that was I can't remember his name now, but he wasn't actually like a mechanical engineer. He was like a water testing engineer.
No, not Ryan. It wasn't. I'm not talking because obviously Kevin Ryan's story is different. This is much newer. So I'm not sure. He wasn't in the division where they were investigating that, but he was some kind of an engineer. I don't think he was
he was a mathematician. He was doing mathematical visualizations of other stuff. I remember him now. I can't remember his name. He's a programmer basically now and does iPhone apps.
It was dense, but anyway, just recently before the anniversary, other than the Willie Rodriguez story, I believe that there were secondary explosives that were set off that had nothing to do with the plane. Anthony Lamacia, all those guys, the manner in which they come down, the blast points. We could talk about pressure. The fact that in the beginning they said, we had this, what was it? A pancaking collapse, right?
That was the first theory.
Yeah, and again, that changed over time. Building 7 especially, I mean, just look at it, the Barry Jennings interview that we did, and then he kind of recanted. And then, we put the whole thing out there. I'm not going to say that I don't know what happened to Barry, but shortly after doing that BBC thing, he was no longer with us, so there's no really way to clarify that. Michael Hess has never given a public statement about being in Building 7 aside from the news that day, right?
Yeah. There was a lot of problems with Jennings' story, though. Like, his timeline didn't really make sense, and he talks about being led out in the lobby and stepping over bodies in the lobby of World Trade Center 7, which there was actually footage of the lobby. So
there was. How late is that footage? That footage in the lobby. Now that what is it? There's first of all, there's
a lot of people went in World Trade Center 7, like right at the start. So there would have been all the people working in there and all the people who left.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the footage that's out there in the public. If you go to I'll bring this up for the public, for anyone that wants to check this out. Enhanced WTC Videos. This guy's done a really great job of getting all the public NIST footage, right? And that includes the back of World Trade Center 7. I know they recently put that out there in the, the 102 Minutes History Channel one. But they go in there, you see them go up the escalators, et cetera, et cetera. That's after the first collapse, not the second collapse. I know I had pieces of that there. This is a great resource for people. This is just the raw footage that basically NIST got. This guy doubled over the frames, and he resaturated them a little. He did a good job. I'd say this, we can question that, but, buildings don't fall that way, Mick. and
yes, they
hold
do.
on. I know we're going to get into it. And I'd like to get your opinion on now this Ron Insana thing. Is he just
I have a very, very detailed opinion on this.
Let's hear.
Have you read his entire statement?
I just listened to the. I only listened to the
so it's easy to take it out of context. Let me there's a post on Metabunk. If you go to the homepage of Metabunk, the first page now is that, and he says, let's see. Remember, 7 World Trade had not come down yet, so I went down to the New York Stock Exchange that Wednesday morning. Now, Wednesday, of course, is the day after Tuesday, and 9/11 was on a Tuesday. So this is him visiting the site on September the 12th, which was and World Trade Center 7 had come down on September 11th. So it seems pretty obvious from the get-go he's talking about something else. Then he says, we were looking over in that direction, and if it had come down in the way it was tilting, it would have wiped out everything from where it stood to Trinity Church to the exchange, the stock exchange, to effectively the mouth of the Hudson. But if you look at an actual map of that doesn't actually make any sense whatsoever for World Trade Center 7, which of course is to the north of the actual site and would have just fallen, at most, it would have fallen into the 1 and 2 area, the main World Trade Center area. So he's actually talking about a different building, and if you look at his description, what he's actually talking about is a building called let's see, 1 Liberty Plaza, which is if you scroll down to my next post after that, you'll see that map there. Okay, so there's 1 Liberty Plaza in the middle, and you can see just to the right of that is Trinity Church and the Stock Exchange. So yeah, if 1 Liberty Plaza had fallen over, it would have taken out Trinity Church, and it would have taken out the Stock Exchange. But World Trade Center 7, which had collapsed the previous day, was in no danger. So he's obviously talking about a different building.
So you think the mistake is made that he's talking not only about another building but another day, instead of the mistake being made that it's Tuesday and not Wednesday?
Oh, both. I'm thinking about both. I mean, they're both issues, obviously, because he visited the site on September the 12th,
Hmm.
and he's saying, like, talking about this building that he thought was going to collapse, and then he says
So let me ask
later,
you this. I'm just wondering
implosion.
if, and this is obviously an if that you don't think is possible, but
Mm-hmm.
if just World Trade Center 7 was proven to you as a controlled demolition, just something was so irrefutable,
Yeah.
would that change your opinion of 9/11 at all?
Oh yeah, definitely, because it would be kind of an incredible thing. I mean, I don't think it's a viable thing for them to have decided on that day to go in and rig the building with explosives and bring it down, and do that secretly without anybody finding out, and cover it all up, and tell all the firemen to be quiet about it and stuff like that. It's just such a highly implausible thing, even if it wasn't part of some broader conspiracy. It actually makes more sense in a way that it would be pre-rigged with explosives. But
Yeah, that's how I would feel about it.
Yeah.
And I would that maybe that would be a contingency plan because of, the largest CIA base being in there outside of Langley, the SEC, the Office of Emergency Management. I mean, these were hubs. I mean, 1 and 2 also. There's no way. I mean,
but
you understand how intelligence works and that there's subdivisions, and even like a Kroll or whatever, or a Stratfor, they're going to have connections to intelligence agencies somewhere. That's where most of these people come from. Now, to me, anyway, just the funding alone, the funding mechanism for these guys raises huge questions. And I wonder how you feel about that. For instance, I think it's pretty irrefutable that Pakistan, on a base level, has something to do with this, right? General Mahmoud Ahmed. And in fact, I'm not sure you're aware, but Dan Rather and CBS aired that piece in 2002 where they said bin Laden was being protected by the Pakistani military in a hospital the night before 9/11. Of course, leave the irregular raid, they find him in Abbottabad, Pakistan. So, I mean, what do you thought of that?
I think the things like issues of the funding are the issues that people should be looking at, because from my perspective, what I see is that the planes hit the buildings, they caught fire, and then they collapsed. Building 7 also caught fire and was hit by Building 1, and that collapsed from the fire. And that to me seems like fairly straightforward from a physics basis. And I've got I'm not like a physicist either, but I have a lot of experience programming physics and doing physics simulations for video games, obviously. And so from my perspective, it all seems to make sense, and the objections that AE 9/11 raised don't make sense. So I think this thing about controlled demolition is a big distraction from any real corruption that's going on. And obviously, there is definitely geopolitical corruption, and there's industrial corruption, and there's individual corruption. There's all kinds of corruption in the world. And I certainly don't agree with everything that you say in Invisible Empire, but there's certainly there's elements of truth to it, and that there are powerful people who are looking out for their own best interests, and there are people who have broader agendas who are trying to do things on a geopolitical stage. I mean, you just got to look at what's coming out today, the stuff with Trump, like playing little games with was it the Ukraine?
The Ukraine, but hold on. All right, so and we're kind of getting a little off 9/11, but it's interesting because this is the big hot take of the day, right? To me, I've seen a shift that somehow the scandal about the actual scandal becomes the scandal. For instance, I did a piece all the way back in April on this Biden-Ukraine scandal before Trump was asking for an investigation. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but essentially it goes like this. His son has no experience with energy. He's getting a $50K a month job, and I believe it was a $1.5 million initial payout, right? So I have Biden at the CFR next to Richard Haass. I believe it was in January of 2018, not talking about that, but talking about coming in on a plane on behalf of that $1 billion loan for arms, right? So basically, they had already negotiated a $1 billion deal that they were going to loan to the Ukraine for their military. Now, he gets in there, and Biden says that he had already been assured by, it starts with a P, but the leader there that they're talking about, I don't want to mispronounce his name, Poroshenko, I think, and another person, that they were going to fire the prosecutor who was investigating his son, okay? So this prosecutor was already in the mix of investigating his kid for this crooked energy deal, right? So Biden says it like this. The leader says, well, you're not the president. And he says, well, why don't you call him? You're not going to get the money. And then he tells him that he's going to be on a plane in 6 hours. And so the guy fires him. They fire this prosecutor.
Yeah, sure, but I think these are kind of like, separate issues in a way. Like, even if Biden was involved in some kind of corruption.
To me, this is something. Listen, I'm not a fan of either side, right?
And the question is really if Trump actually broke the law.
But
did he actually solicit the help from a foreign government to, think about Watergate? That's my
Watergate.
What if Nixon was actually investigating something that the DNC did that he personally thought was illegal? Like if he thought there was some kind of corruption going on.
Wasn't the crime physically breaking in and trying to steal shit? I didn't want to curse, but I'm looking at this, right? And to me, it's a real scandal. I'm not a Joe Biden fan. In fact, Joe Biden is one of these guys that's well aware of the Pakistani ISI funding. He went on TV on September 13th and bragged that he had a talk with General Mahmoud Ahmed, who he called the first or the second most powerful person in that nation. He threatened Pakistan on the floor of the Senate and said, they're going to have to make a hard decision very soon. And of course, they made the decision to ally with the U.S. And, he was caught twice talking about this funding and saying, it was classified, right? And that they were working with the Taliban. For instance, Bob Graham's very open about the fact that General Mahmoud Ahmed was working with the Taliban as well. Taliban and, by the way, Al-Qaeda, very different things to me. But it showed a funding mechanism. It shows that Biden's well aware of this. No one challenges him on that up on the stage, right? No one's even talking about foreign policy for the most part at these horrible DNC debates. Now, I'm talking about this in April, hoping that they can investigate this, right? Now, they've already replaced the prosecutor. But my point would be this. They're no longer under an administration that already corrupted the investigation. So Trump saying, hey, you can reopen that or you should reopen that isn't a problem to me. That's my point. To me, it's not. He's not.
The point is, all he's doing is saying, he's putting all this effort into trying to get Biden investigated. Is he putting effort into getting everybody else investigated who has allegations of corruption? There's all kinds of allegations of corruption with thousands of people throughout the world. But he picks out Biden. He picks out Biden because he thinks that Biden is going to be his opponent in the election.
But again, so by your logic, he should just get away with it because of who he is?
Oh, Biden, no. If there's some corruption there, obviously it should be prosecuted. But same with everybody else.
I agree.
Everybody.
Listen,
what about Trump? Trump
has a lot of dealings on other countries. I think that is really an impeachable offense on Trump. I don't know that there's a lot, especially when you look at past presidents. That's not to say I love him. I don't. I'm very upset with what's going on in Afghanistan, Iraq. For instance, when he talked about the military-industrial complex, I don't know if you caught that clip on Fox. Did you?
Sure. Trump talking about it?
Yes. Well, essentially, it was after the drone incident, right? They shot down our robot. Nobody's seen the Iran drone incident.
Yeah.
And nobody's... What was that? Oh, geez. I don't even know what that was. So this drone incident, no one talks about the fact that, first of all, it's very unlikely this was not in their airspace. This is a drone that flies at 60,000 feet. We don't have them shot out of the air every day, Mick.
This is the Iran's airspace shooting down the American drone.
So just for that to happen, it appears we baited them. Two, there was a naval plane in the vicinity of that drone at the same time with 131 real people on it. Iran did not shoot that down. They put it out there. They said they could prove that both of those things were in their airspace. U.S. media hasn't covered it much. Both Pence and Trump have talked about the fact that they used restraint and that Iran did not shoot down that naval plane with people in it, right? That's a big geopolitical scandal to me. And then for that...
Why would they shoot down a plane with 130 people in? It's one thing to shoot down a drone, but shooting down a plane would have been a de facto act of war.
Exactly. But why are you putting that stuff in their area? Listen, we already surround their nation in that Gulf region, right? Yeah. I'm not telling you I love the Iranian regime or any of that. I'm saying that Iran's not surrounding our coast. They're not on the Pacific. Russia isn't there either. Their biggest ally.
No, I know what you're saying.
Our military is there. They're not running planes around there. I like the restraint, but then when Trump talks about the military-industrial complex and then says that Afghanistan is the Harvard University of terrorism, that's nonsense. It's nonsense. When he runs on, you got to love the WikiLeaks, and now Assange is in this crazy 14 14-part indictment, which would eviscerate free speech as we know it and publishing rights, literally going after him for things like saying, if you have information, we'll pay you $25,000 for it. Not, just encouraging hacking. He's a cyber terrorist for encouraging hacking or encouraging people to get real information. I think that mechanism is extremely important. And I hope you would agree that, to me, again, this whole Russiagate thing is not as important as the emails themselves that came out. That was the scandal to me. Let's read those emails. Let's look at the corruption there.
I think again, you can do both, though. You could still, if Clinton did do something wrong, then yeah, let's look at that. But if the other people did things wrong too, it doesn't mean that just because they were trying to expose something else that was wrong. This whole
idea that now administrations don't work with foreign powers or other intelligence agencies to get dirt on people is nonsense. It's been going on forever. It's not new, right? That's all. This isn't new, and they're conflated. I don't know how much of the Mueller report you've read or the remember when they put out that first FBI document kind of linking Russia to interfering with the elections, where they had RT and Abby Martin in there? It wasn't a lot of proof, but basically they had run the basic idea that this Guccifer 2.0 was a conglomerate of bad Russian actors, right? And then they were showing base Russia propaganda. They didn't have any evidence on it. So
what do you think of the Internet Research Agency, like Russia's kind of supposed hothouse of people trolling the internet for Russian propaganda purposes? Do you think that exists?
Saying it doesn't exist. How effective it is, I think, is overblown to the max. I think that Zuckerberg, for instance, when he was initially talked to about this, he laughed about it. He scoffed at it. It's like, I think that the people can, and then he flipped 100%. And it wasn't
just because he looked into it and did the actual research, because they did actually look at the reach of these commercials.
Listen, there's a lot of people that don't want him in there. I mean, I don't know how much you've been following that. The last 18 months, there are plenty of shareholders that want to flip him out. And I think that's the case before. Listen, Facebook's powerful, man. I mean, I would say, it has a huge base. I get the fact that, we can talk about interfering with elections, but at the end of the day, I don't think that Russia is, brainwashing the masses. I think they certainly have their interests. I think they're
trying to.
I think they certainly would have rather had Trump in there than Clinton. I won't say that, but I do not think that they, especially even before the indictment, I remember when they put out that first GRU report and they were naming these people, the people they were going to indict. It was very thin. It was very thin to me. I was like, well, you think they did this? Can you provide me with more or how they did it? Even the Alice Donovan character. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this was someone who was posing as a journalist, right? So she was contacting different little media outlets, Counterpunch being one of them that published her. And she ended up being a conglomerate of these people. So, yeah, that stuff exists. I'm not saying it doesn't. Did Alice Donovan do this on behalf of the Trump administration or the group, or even Russian agents working with Trump? No, I don't believe that.
Yeah, well, I think Russiagate itself, there isn't enough evidence to prosecute. But obviously Russia was trying to influence the elections to a degree, but I'm sure the CIA tries to influence elections in other countries too.
Of course,
it doesn't mean that it's a good thing just because one side is doing it. I prefer people in a country to make their own decisions, but
I would say this though. Think about this. All right, you're talking about interference in elections and whether or not. I don't believe that they thought they were going to find Russian collusion. I don't think that was the purpose of this at all. I think they were going to do to Trump what they did to Manafort and others. They were hoping to get him in the seat and get a perjury trap. It's what they did to Clinton, right? Clinton. It's not like Clinton got impeached for an affair. He got impeached for lying about that affair. So I really feel like, that was this whole thing. If we can get him to sit down and just start talking, that's it. And they weren't able to do that. And that's when they said, you know what? Now we have to take this report about Russian collusion. We have to break it into two parts, and we have to make it totally about obstruction of justice. And the other thing is that you saw those obstruction of justice talking points 12 months before. People like Avenatti were throwing them out all over the place. So I knew from the get-go they weren't going to find Russian collusion. It was a perjury trap just like they did with Manafort. Trump didn't fall for it. So then they tried to make it about something else. Mueller looked horrible up there. You can't say that he
Yeah,
really
it wasn't good showing. It was a bit disappointing.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, listen, frontmen exist. Mueller was just the face of that. He wasn't running that operation. I mean, I don't believe he was. If he was, I think he would have had a lot more information while he was sitting up there. He was a figurehead they could put out there as a guy who was in the Bush administration, worked on 9/11. You know how I feel about Mueller. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I think the like he said, that the report is what is actually the product of the investigation, not his personal account of it. But let's kind of switch gears a little bit here. Like, I want to talk about some of your I'm kind of really interested in how your beliefs have changed over time. Like, you used to be, I don't know, perhaps a bit more conspiratorial than you are now, and I'm just wondering if there are things that you thought in the past to be true that you no longer think to be true, like as you get older and wiser.
Well, I would say that alien thing is for sure. I like your take on a lot of the the Stars Academy stuff. I know you don't believe that those gimbal footage are anything nefarious. You think one's like a seagull, right?
Well, that is a possibility of the go fast thing. I think it's more likely a balloon, but it's actually a small, slow-moving object, which is probably a balloon.
But I would say that you believe that we have other type of aerial vehicles than what we're putting out there, right? And possibly other types of propulsion systems.
Sure, yeah, but I wouldn't think they're going to be quite as advanced as people are making out. Like, they're talking about things that can move 5 miles in a tenth of a second or something like that from a dead stop, which would be literally impossible with physics as we know it. So yeah, I'm sure there's stealth fighters and there's things that move a bit faster, and there's probably some interesting looking drones. But nothing that would actually do that.
Navy patent that's out there of these, very UFO-like vehicles that say that they're anti-gravity, and there's another couple out there that also have weird gravitational fields, et cetera. And you can look these patents up. I mean, they're reporting them on Metro, but I actually have been to the patent site. Well, what are your opinions on even that stuff that's public?
Well, my opinions are that patents are complete bullshit. Just because something is patented, it doesn't mean it actually exists. There's a patent for a birthing aid that was an actual real patent, and what it involves was strapping a woman to a rotating table and spinning her around until the baby pops out by centrifugal force.
Is that a naval patent, Mick?
It's not, no, but there's also patents for things like teleportation devices. Patents get issued. And yeah, maybe the Navy has some idea about some advanced technology or something that might work in the future, so they patent it. They just patent everything. People patent everything that comes into their heads. Doesn't mean it exists.
Okay. Again, I would say that the majority of what we're seeing in the vast majority of what we're seeing in video or pictures, I mean, the older pictures, you can't trust any of those now. And even video is very tough these days. Obviously, we can get into that deepfake stuff. And that, but I think one of two things. Number one, you're looking at propulsion systems, probably, black, something other than rocket technology. And two, there's very good possibility that maybe you're looking at traditional drones that are using holographic technology. We have that.
I don't know about that.
Well, I'm just saying it would be a lot easier to have an aerial hologram of a pulsing dot or something like that.
Really,
you don't think
wouldn't.
so?
It really wouldn't, because there's serious problems with holograms. You can't really have a clear air hologram that appears darker than the sky around it, because all you can do is emit light. The only clearer holograms that
UFOs are on video, though. I'm not talking about the ones we're talking about. They're chasing and getting them on radar. I'm talking about somebody throws up their camera, and it's basically a light emission.
If it's a light in the sky, that's one thing, but that's just a light in the sky. But if you can actually see a shape or something, and especially if it appears dark, that's impossible for it to be a hologram, because you can't actually project darkness into things. You can't project something into a spot in the sky. It's hard enough projecting light into the sky. You have to either project it onto something, or they have this one technique where they use these kind of plasma lasers to make little dots like spark in the sky, but that doesn't work on a large scale because it would be incredibly hot. But I don't think holograms are a valid thing. And holograms are I think one of those things that people bring up without really understanding how optics and physics actually work. People think because you see it on TV, holograms will just project a giant hologram onto the sky or whatever.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an aerial vehicle, a small one that's projecting a hologram around it. You don't think that would be physically possible, huh?
No, absolutely not. It's all it could do is perhaps like shine some bright lights around it, but you can't project something around you because there's nothing to project it onto. You've just got the air around you, especially when it's high up, when the air is very, very thin. If it's flying through a cloud, then yeah, you could do something, but no, you couldn't actually. There's no such thing as like cloaking.
So you don't think a technology and this is a big conspiracy theory out there, and I'll tell you what, I've tried to find this lecture by this journalist, I think it's at a Canadian university, about Project Bluebeam, right? Everybody brings up Bluebeam and voice of God technology, this type of thing. And I've always I don't really talk about much because I haven't been able to validate it whatsoever. I'd love to get this lecture or any kind of government document that mentions anything like this, but I haven't found one. I'm sure you haven't.
No, well, Project Bluebeam is the idea that there's going to be like a fake either alien invasion or visitation
Deity
of God or something, and as a trick to bring about the New World Order.
Sure.
But it's technological bullshit, basically, like for the reasons I mentioned before, that you can't actually project anything other than light. So you can't project a hologram onto the sky. When you see holograms, in holographic displays that in a mall or something, they're always like projected onto something. Often it's something like it's just a simple angled screen, and the actual hologram is projected from below. Or it's projected into something like misty air or something like that, and or it's a spinning thing, and it's timed with the spinning thing. But there actually has to be something there. You can't project something onto the air. Now you could maybe do like loudspeakers everywhere and have the voice of God come down and say, "Everyone get into the FEMA camps." But
well, what about? I'm interested on your take. I know that the Star Wars program is said to have failed. But let's say it didn't. And let's say that you had something that could project from space. And now, whether that would be inside of our atmosphere or not, and downward, obviously we have satellite technology and those type of waves. You think that sound waves just wouldn't be plausible?
Sound waves you couldn't project from space because they need air to actually get through. You would have to do something kind of microwave modulation of the atmosphere, which would be take an incredible amount of energy and would be completely infeasible to do from space. You'd have to basically set up a sequence of atomic explosions timed with the sound waves or something like that. People talk about like HAARP. I don't know if you're familiar with HAARP.
Of course.
Another kind of conspiracy theory type thing, and that can actually modify a very small region, or relatively small region of the atmosphere. But it's actually the atmosphere. You talk about the atmosphere and you think about the air, in front of you. But what HAARP does is it modifies a region of space, essentially, like 100 miles up, where there's almost no air. It's like, one molecule per square foot or something like that. And it's mostly free electrons because of the bombardment of the sun. It's just completely different to what people's idea is. People think, you're modulating the atmosphere, but it's really not doing anything that can affect things at ground level. And it's the same thing with like space projectors. They couldn't do anything that would affect things at ground level. Like the blue sky isn't like this blue screen above us. It's miles and miles and miles of increasingly thinner air. So if you shine a beam into it, you're just going to get a beam. You're not going to get an actual projection unless you do it on a cloud. So I think the Project Bluebeam is complete nonsense, basically, and it's an interesting, kind of almost like a science fiction fantasy. Like, it's entertaining to think about it, but there's no way it's physically possible at all.
But I would say this, science fiction, I mean, there's a lot of things, for instance, that you would have said as science fiction never come to reality, and that's, I think, there's a good segue into the deep fake thing, right? I've looked at this forever, just because I went to school for graphics, editing, 3D modeling, and even, back then what they could do with Forrest Gump when I was a kid. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool, and obviously it was very intensive. Now, I just posted something that somebody did from 2001: A Space Odyssey with great shading and shadows, and Elon Musk is the main character, and it looks like Elon Musk, and it's done extremely. And the first thing that clicks in my brain is The Running Man. I don't know if you remember that film, but
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. The very beginning is Schwarzenegger's character not wanting to kill a bunch of people on the streets, I think of Los Angeles, who want food. And his superior's telling him to do it, and he fights it off. They stop it, they kill those people, and then they blame it on him. And then they put video of him doing it out, which is faked. And then later they show the same real-time technology when Jesse Ventura's character is supposedly in a cage with him and he kills him, and it's really another person. I think at this point that real-time technology is somewhere pretty much in the near future. Yeah. So, you know, and we have the audio stuff. When do we stop trusting what's out there? Like, for instance, do you think there's a possibility that any of those bin Laden videos might have been using, you know, a very, I would say, primitive type of this technology, just the editing base? Is that even a possibility?
It seems unlikely to me, just based on the level of technology back then. Like the way it's done now is essentially like these large AIs running on, like, you know, quite often on multi-core servers. People can do it at home now, though, but they have to, like, you know, train it overnight and stuff, and you can still kind of looks kind of iffy. But if you use more computers, it gets better. But back then, I don't really think that they had the technology. Certainly nothing that I was aware of. You can always speculate and say, oh yeah, the government is always 10 years ahead, but you know, generally they're not 10 years ahead in things like this when it comes to things like, you know, faking graphics and whatnot. All that research is done in universities. You know, the stuff comes out of people's PhD theses and things like that, which is all kind of public stuff, and it's all work that's done in the public. And it's impossible to say that it wouldn't have happened, but I see no indication that it happened. But I think, you know, you say when should we stop trusting what we see? I think, you know, we should stop trusting it now. Really, if you see a picture, somebody talking about something on TV, it could be fake. People are going to start. You know, it's going to be very common soon for people to be making revenge porn type things with deep faking people's faces. Yeah, so it's already happening. So it's just going to be more and more common. People are probably going to do it with me and you at some point. Not together, hopefully, but...
Who knows? Maybe it'll be an undercover conversation. This is what happened when the camera's turned off. But I find that interesting. And one of the things that this kind of shoots off to me is quantum computing, right? I'd love to get your take on that, because now we're being told, I mean, and I'd like to get your take on what's being pushed, I would say, by the mainstream. You know, all this time we've been living in base reality, and now people like Elon Musk are promoting that we're in a simulation, right? Yeah. I know that Rogan had somebody else on that. I don't believe that. And the other thing that's being promoted, not only by Google and Microsoft and IBM, and I assume NASA, who's working with Google in a lot of these quantum realms, is that the multiverse is real. And somehow you and I are doing these things an infinite amount of times, infinite ways, and sometimes even transcending our physical appearance. And to me, number one, that's not a reality, but I don't know. Hey, I'm not God. They say they're tapping into this, you know, somehow for the superpositions, and I forget what the other quantum thing that they're talking about is. But what is your view on all of this? You know, before we get to the singularity, because I don't think we can upload consciousness either.
That is a lot of topics. This is, you know, something that Joe Rogan likes to talk about a lot.
Interesting, because they're the side of you people don't get to see. You know, they see the snarky debunker in 144 characters.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating topic. Are we living in a simulation? I think, you know, I always kind of consider it kind of irrelevant. If you can't do anything about it, then it doesn't really matter if you're living in a simulation or not. All you can do is you can look at what the laws of physics are and dive deeper. You know, say what's going on with these subatomic particles, what's going on with quarks, what's going on with like photon entanglement and stuff like that. Why does that work? It looks really weird. And you look at the universe and you think it's just like, you know, solid objects moving around, bumping into each other, but then you look really deep. It's completely different to that. It's and then you look really, really deep at the quantum level, and it's bizarre and inexplicable. And I think quantum computers are very interesting because there's certain things that quantum computers can theoretically do, like they can break encryption. They can pretty much break any encryption out there. Like there's if the theoretical thing pans out, then the public key cryptography system that's based on factoring the products of very large prime numbers could be cracked, you know, in an instant. buy an appropriate quantum computer. But no one's really got quantum computers to do very much recently. They're not exactly powerful, because you can actually simulate a quantum computer way, way easier than actually building a quantum computer. And they have these things called qubits, which are the basic units of quantum computers, and I can't remember how much the number of bits is in a quantum computer now, but it's not very many. It's like handfuls.
No, well, there's two different types. There's the ones that are using quantum annealing, and that's the D-Wave machines, and that's the NASA project. But then you have these new ones, and I think there's somewhere in the 72 qubit range was the last thing I was reading, and Hartman, I can't remember what his last name is, but I find this stuff super interesting because, like I think that I think a lot of people are banking on cryptocurrencies to some kind of pan out in the future.
Could be a problem.
And I'm telling them, man, it's a computer. It's ones and zeros. People figure things out. The Xbox gets hacked. The PS3 gets hacked. The PS4 has been hacked. So the idea that they're going to be able to create a unhackable algorithm, we don't know where these things are going in the next 20 or 30 years. And personally, I feel like, first of all, I'm not in love with a cashless society. I think that's very, very dangerous.
Sure.
That ups the track trace database society. That, to me, I mean, we're already there, right? People are just buying smart devices like, hey, I like an Xbox. It's the one thing that I'm not willing to give up that has a microphone in my.
That's funny, because you, at the end of, what was it now? Invisible Enemies, you say, throw away your Xbox.
And I didn't say throw away.
Turn off, turn off.
I think there's a time for everything, right? Like I bought Borderlands 3. It's the first video. I skipped MK11, and I got Borderlands 3. And I think I got it on opening day. I forget what day it came out. It's got to be like 10 days ago. Most of the people I know that are serious about it, they put 40, 80, 120 hours into this thing. I got like 7. Right. I got like 7 hours into it. I like my downtime. I like sitting there playing a video game for an hour maybe and I tried to stream it on my channel. Couldn't do it. It doesn't interest me to interact that way. This is my time. Either that or sit down and watch some American Pickers, maybe some UFC. I think you have to have that, Mick. And I think that, one of the things I like about you is that you do seem to pull some people back from the edge of ridiculous, like the Q thing. I mean, that was just insanity, and that it's still thriving is insane to me. And the amount of money grifters on that is very upsetting to me. I didn't even understand how people could believe that, like magic message boards and superheroes behind the scenes. Listen, people want to believe that things are going to get better and that they don't have to do anything for it. And I think that's a big problem with today. At least to me, when I was stomping my feet about 9/11, there was still an anti-war movement. Code Pink was still getting coverage. Cindy Sheehan was out there. Ray McGovern was just getting going. We had people in the streets. Right now, we're in more nations than any other time in the world. We could talk about Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, Libya. People don't even know we're involved in those nations. Whether they're just, drone targets like in Yemen and our weapons, or ground troops. No one seems to be upset. We're on the cusp of a real conflict with a nation with 80 million people and a real military that Russia's not just going to let us go into, right? Who knows where that leads?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation and seems dangerous to me.
No one cares, man. I mean, that none of these are hot topics in the mainstream media, on any of the talk shows, or in the street. It's all identity politics and how to separate us. It's, even the alternative. It's Antifa this, or, Proud Boys that, and they're just such a marginal group. And I think they show kind of the worst of everything. They want battle. They want conflict. They don't want people to come together and be anti-war and ask questions. And to me, that's troubling, man.
Let me ask you a question. Like you talk a lot about the problems with the world as you see them. You've done a lot of research into what these problems are. How would you picture a better world, an ideal world?
Sure. I mean, all right, so first you start at home, right? I always tell people start locally. You can go and you can run for local mayor. State senator is not out of some people's reach. You have to start locally, but if we were going to talk about a national level, especially since I think we can agree that the United States is the world superpower, right?
Sure.
I think we took a very, very big turn for the worse on two occasions. One, when we create a national security state where now the people don't really get to find things out anymore, and it's up to the fourth estate to dig. And we no longer really have a judicial, executive, and legislative branch that are checks and balances, right? At some level, the checks stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, whether that's well beyond a presidential level. That's a huge issue. And that's post-World War II. That's the atomic era. In fact, Annie Jacobson talks about how Area 51 was a big pissing contest between the military and the CIA as to who was really going to run this thing. You know what I mean? And kind of born out of the CIA. It was interesting. It's a really interesting read, very dense. And the second thing that really screwed us was allowing lobbying in politics. The idea that we can put so much money into politics and you can have a super PAC or a group on behalf of this and that, not only pay into candidates, but then after the fact, promise them a job.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one.
So the two biggest things we could do. Let's roll back. Like, for instance, it was very troubling to me that, one of the things, again, Trump said he was going to do, he's fighting the deep state, the deep state.
Yeah.
He's all the JFK documents at this point, right? And on two occasions, he failed. Now, in my opinion, if you can't release those documents, and obviously, I feel those have shades of deep state all over them. If you can't expose the deep state from 50-plus years ago, how in the world are you going to do it now? And appointments like Bolton and Pompeo and Haspel, it's great Bolton's gone, but who's going to take his place? Just show that battle in a guy that said he was coming in isn't a real one.
So you talk about, like, when you started out, checks and balances. You think, like, we've got executive overreach right now?
Sure. Yes. But I would say that
how would you fix it?
Overreach goes beyond the president of the United States, right? It's not just the president of the United States. It's his cabinet. Mm-hmm. It's his, just about everything. Right now, for instance, we're arguing about the Ukraine phone calls and whether we're going to get to hear these phone calls and what server the transcripts were put on and blah, 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 blah. To me, that's all red tape and budgets. I'm more concerned that a president of the United States, after Congress and Senate says we're leaving Yemen, right? He can just say no, veto. You know what I'm saying? We're going to veto it. We're not going to talk about it. And he can come and run on, well, who did 9/11? He starts hinting towards the Saudis. And one of the first deals he cuts is a $400+ billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. That's an issue with me. So there is no oversight on that. And don't get me wrong, you used to be able to veto those things, but then there'd be challenges. Where was the challenge from Congress on that, or the challenge from the Senate? No, it was into the next election cycle, the next party line nonsense, and he's a racist. He's a Nazi. Like, things that I don't believe he is. Doesn't mean I think he's a good person, Mick. Mick, I think it's very obvious. The guy was three things out of the gates before I voted for him, and I let everybody know because – I'm not Alex Jones. I wasn't wearing I'm on the Trump chain chewing. The guy, one, is a gangster. He created Atlantic City. If you believe in your heart of hearts that a city built around gambling in New Jersey had nothing to do with organized crime or has nothing to do with organized crime today,
totally,
you're a little bit slow. Okay, so we'll start there. Number one, he's a gangster. Two, an obvious womanizer. He was never shy about it. I remember
it's crazy.
People stuff when I was a kid. He owned beauty pageants, like literal beauty pageants. He was very open about these things. So you got misogynist, you got gangster. Three, what was his big comeback? He's an actor. Throughout my, and I'm, we're
reality
probably
TV actually
got less than 5 years. Even before he got his reality show, he was all over television. He was on the talk show circuit. He was on, things like Inside Edition, Entertainment Tonight. He was very apt with the camera. And then when they gave him a reality show, which we know is far from reality, he got even better at it. So you were already electing a gangster misogynist actor who you could not trust. That should be enough. I don't believe that he's a racist. I don't believe that he's a Nazi. I don't believe all these things they're throwing at the wall. Why not be honest with people? Well, I think that the reason they don't want to be honest with people is because the majority of politicians that get in it, you could say almost the same thing, right?
Maybe so.
Yeah.
We're kind of coming up on an hour. I want to touch on one thing that is just a kind of a personal thing. Like, I remember you doing this documentary called Shade. Like, I think like 2010 or something like that, 2013?
I came out in 2013, but I was doing it in 2012. It's like, yeah.
Okay. So I remember Shade as being a chemtrail documentary.
Sure.
But I looked at the description on it, and it's all about Bilderbergers.
Well, I would say this. I'm not sure which one. It's not on my channel, whoever wrote the description. That's on Shepard's channel. But the first 30 minutes is Bilderberg. It's like, if it starts at Bilderberg 2012 on the scene, it explains Bilderberg. I'd say the second part is, which is the meat, there's about three sections in it that are large, is more, I wouldn't call them chemtrails because I try not to. Solar radiation management, prolonged jet contrails, Rosalind Peterson's heavy in there. And then the last part is more eugenics and biotechnology based, where we kind of run off into Gates and, his talks. I don't know if they were TED. I think one of them was a TED talk where he talks about carbon. But even, headlines again, maybe like 3 weeks ago, I did a story on it. Now it's not solar radiation management. He's got a new thing called solar radiation perturbation. I don't know if you've seen this yet. And the models on these are balloons that are then shooting out these jet trails instead of actual jets.
Well, yeah, it's all stuff that's theoretical, of course. But what do you? That's what I would say. Well, I guess my point though was like, has your thinking changed on this? Like, that was like what 5-6 years ago.
I've never been one of those guys that tells you like they're mind control drugs, or they're controlling us through that, or there's some other thing. I think they've been pretty straightforward. That they think that this is going to help with global warming, that this is going to cool the planet. And I think it's in test phases. I think that we will find documents in the next 20 to 30 years where first of all, I think it'll be commonplace in 20 to 30 years, unfortunately. And I don't agree with it. I do think that they're putting the things they say they're going to put in there to reflect the sunlight, period. I think these programs exist. I don't know how extensive they are. I do believe them to be on the East and West Coasts. And, I think the evidence is out there. I don't think they've been 100% honest with us, Mick. I know that sounds crazy that I might see.
Yeah, but I interviewed David Keith about a month ago. And, I've talked to him before. And he's like the most famous geoengineering proponent out there. Sure. And he says point blank that nothing has been done. There's not even any tests being done as far as.
And you trust the guy though?
Yeah, but so you think he's lying to me? You think?
I don't know that. First of all, let's say he's not lying. Would he be in the position to know if it had a certain clearance level? Let me give you an example. Right. So we talked about Annie Jacobson and her books in the Area 51 book. Right. She talks about magic clearance actually being real. And that's kind of like a mystified clearance. I've never seen any documents that have been declassified that have magic on them, magic eyes only, other than the ones that I don't believe to be real. We've seen plenty of top secret, et cetera. Is there a possibility that the military has a type of clearance like this, or programs that are so deeply compartmentalized where a guy like David Keith, who's a proponent of it, wouldn't know? He's
not just a proponent, though. He's the guy who's actually doing the experiments. He's running the MIT program that's actually putting these balloons up in the sky and doing it. And it would kind of posit, what you're suggesting is that all of science is running kind of in two parallels. There's like science desperately trying to figure out geoengineering, and they've been doing it for decades. But then you've also got the government has already figured it out.
And I'm saying they may not let him know what they're doing to the extent they're doing it. In other words, he might be working with balloons and they're working with jets. It's just like I still believe, Mick, hold on. I still believe that some of these, craft that we're seeing are other propulsion systems, and that they could be running them against their own military on purpose. Let's see how this does against a couple F-15s. Let's see if they can catch up. Let's see the reports. I'm sure you're familiar with Mirage Men, right? The film.
No. What is that?
So Mirage Men is a documentary mostly on Richard Doty, who is, supposedly this UFO alien whistleblower guy. Stephen Greer uses him all the time.
Right,
and I had to turn off the last documentary. I forget if it was Disclosure. I watched the one with the little alien body, supposedly. That was tough enough, serious. But the follow-up the follow-up was just, as soon as I saw him using Richard Doty as a source, I had to turn it off. I couldn't do it. Yeah. And I think Greer is heavily compromised. We can get into that another time. But,
well, he's wrong. I wouldn't say compromised.
But Doty himself had basically bragged about how there was a guy who had a business across the street, very rich man, right? And he was seeing some of their experimental craft. And he was reporting it to the military. And he thought it was aliens. So they sent Doty to kind of bring him along, oh yeah, it's aliens. We're going to work with you. He's having meetings with other people in the military. He thinks he's playing secret agent man with the military, and he thinks these things are aliens. And in reality, they're government craft. They bankrupted the guy. He went completely insane, ended up in a mental institution. If you haven't seen that documentary, I would really, I feel like in essence, that's what's happening to Tom DeLonge right now. I don't trust that Luis Elizondo guy. I watched 15 minutes of that History Channel show, and I mean, I got an intel dump for you. Like, no, you have an article that's right here that you could send via your phone and say, hey, look what they published, but you want to use language and make him feel like he's a secret agent man, and you guys are going to reveal aliens to the world. I think that's a very real program, man. I think disinformation goes further than you think.
I think that's entertainment, though. It's not disinformation. Elizondo is, maybe he believes what he's doing, but what he's doing on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, whatever it was, it's just...
Yeah, Tom DeLonge believes it, bro.
Yeah, he's a little, a little eccentric. Not eccentric.
It's just Dan Aykroyd
passionate.
They believe it. They believe it.
Well, lots of people believe strange things. I mean, just because Ed Asner believes that 9/11 was a controlled demolition doesn't mean that I think it is. What's his name? Chuck Norris believes in chemtrails. Yeah. So lots of people believe in things. It doesn't make them true. You got to actually say what is the actual evidence for these things.
I agree, but you don't think that like for instance with this To the Stars Academy, you don't think DeLonge is really being played out for his money and his fame?
Oh. No, I think if anything, he's playing other people. He
wants to profiteer from this.
He's got a sweet deal on it where they actually have to pay him like $100,000 a year or something just to be associated with it. And he every time you look at one of their pages in the top corner or underneath their emails, it says invest now. They're trying to get investors, and he's a big part of it. He's the name, and his name's on the financial documents too. So I think he probably does believe, but he probably also wants to make it a financial success as well because it's his company. But I don't think there's some kind of secret CIA plot to trick people into looking at UFOs using Tom DeLonge. I think it's just him being a bit of a UFO fan and doing this.
Like an actual mission. But I think that obviously you saw he was talking to Podesta in those emails, right?
Yeah, sure. But that's, Podesta's a UFO fan. What's his name? Harry Reid is a UFO fan. There's lots of UFO fans. Like, there's probably like a good chunk of people in Congress were people who loved reading science fiction when they were young and think that UFOs would be a great thing. And like people, you and I, we grew up and we were really interested in like UFOs and the paranormal and stuff like that. And lots of people were really interested in UFOs and the paranormal. And so you get congressmen who were interested in UFOs and even the paranormal.
Well, I would say this, man. At least with UFOs, there's enough documentation and there's enough. I mean, we talk about Blue Book, et cetera, all these other things where you can get into government documents. When we talk about, Bigfoot believers or Loch Ness Monster or ghosts, you don't see that in government documents. You do see some stuff on mind control, obviously, and the ideas of telepathy on certain levels. I did a video, man, I wish I could remember exactly what the document was, but it was a really interesting document that was running these experimentations that was basically saying that your mind was creating the reality around you. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, I forget which one it was, but I found that fascinating. At the same time, it wasn't a camera crew running around an old abandoned house with people with, GoPros making stuff up. It's a controlled environment. They're actually looking at this phenomena. It's interesting to me that they would even look at the phenomena, let alone the results, right?
Yeah, but again, interesting stuff. It's interesting stuff, so people look at it because it's entertaining, and that's why you get so many shows on TV about this stuff.
Well, again, I try. Believe me, I can't even watch most of TV. I barely get through anything. Yeah. But I would say that the UFO phenomenon is much different than those other paranormal things. I think there's a very legit reality behind it. I don't think it's extraterrestrial in nature. I'm not discounting the possibility that extraterrestrials exist somewhere. Sure. But, the more, I don't know, I guess, fantastic stuff that, we're working with the Greys and the Palladians, and they're in the center of the earth, and, all that other stuff. That is science fiction to me. That's a read, like, I forget who was the one there was the guy, Phil Schneider, who told the story that he was in an underground base in a shootout with aliens and had this huge scar. And to me, one of the most off-putting things about what David Icke has done in the past is the Anunnaki stuff. Obviously the shape-shifting lizard thing that took, I couldn't go anywhere 10 years ago, without being asked my opinion on lizard people and this stuff. And I roll my eyes, but at the same time, Icke is one of the few people that's stayed consistently anti-war this movement. So I've got to at least give him that,
Yeah. It's a distraction though, isn't it? Like, maybe Icke has some good points on some things, but he's got so much crazy going on there that it's hard to take him seriously. And
I agree.
That's what I try to do, is like get rid of the crazy stuff, and so people can focus on the good points. I certainly don't agree with everything that you say, but I do agree with some things that you say. Yeah.
And I know that we've already gone over an hour, but and we should do this on my platform too, and then we should actually do a debate on 9/11 where it's controlled, and we both get the certain amount of time. I'm looking forward to that. But I'd love to get your take, especially since I've been covering this for like 10 years now, and all the revelations on the Epstein thing. Just overall, what are the possibilities he killed himself? What are the possibilities he didn't? Would you ever even entertain with somebody who was a billionaire that he could have been extracted? Intelligence ties? Give me your synopsis.
I think he probably killed himself. I think there's a possibility that he was kind of allowed to kill himself, like he wasn't given the suicide watch that he was needed, and that might have been something that might have come down from above. But I think it's also possible that that didn't happen. It was just essentially incompetence on the prison system, and especially that one prison he was in that was very, very understaffed. It had janitors doing like checking on the prisoners and things like that. And people like point out evidence like the hyoid bone broke in his neck, but if you do the real research on that, then you find that it does actually break a lot of the time in hangings. Especially in older people, because it gets more brittle with age. It's much less common with younger people. So the evidence of murder, I think, is very, very flimsy. Perhaps the evidence that he was allowed to kill himself is a little bit stronger, but I wouldn't call it conclusive. But I think obviously he has a lot of ties to very powerful people. You're going all the way up to the Clintons and Prince Andrew. He's got least them being on his plane and things like that, but so there's obviously a lot of possibilities out there.
Well, I'm glad you at least think there's some possibilities there, because to me this is one of those really important stories where I want to find out if Acosta was told that he was intelligence and that he had to leave it alone. I want to know why when reported to the FBI back in 2002, nothing was done. Maria Farmer, her allegations are true. They found those documents. I just had Whitney Webb on my show, and we were talking about yet another instance where he and Wexner were involved in the offshoot of Air America, the CIA plane, Southern Air Transport, and a scandal there. There was a lot of hands off on this guy. What we publicly know he did is absolutely abhorrent. And, I was one of those guys that laid off the intelligence until Vicky Ward, brought it up, just because there wasn't anything really conclusive. But Vicky Ward, being a journalist that was trying to break this before anybody else, did have some credence, right? And what I also found was really interesting is before Adnan Khashoggi's name came up, I had actually done a separate video on Khashoggi specifically to kind of show his role in that international intelligence network that pulled off Iran-Contra, because I thought that was really important. And for her to say that he was one of Khashoggi's clients or working for Khashoggi in that period of the early 80s, you know, when he was brokering at least 5 of these arms deals during Iran-Contra is extremely suspect. A lot of people don't talk about how Prince Andrew is the UK's arm dealer. You know, he's the one cutting deals with Saudi Arabia.
I was going to bring that up, actually, because, you know, reading about Prince Andrew, I think he was in the cable leaks a while back. There was a bunch of diplomatic cables kind of relating stuff that Prince Andrew had said, and Prince Andrew just comes across as this kind of arrogant asshole power broker type person who's using his position to further his own agenda or whatever he's doing. So, yeah, I based on that, I was no fan of Prince Andrew, and it's kind of interesting, like, hearing about other connections. Yeah, like I say, there's definitely corruption in the world, and powerful people tend to be more powerfully corrupted. I'm not saying they're all corrupted. I wouldn't, you know, go as far as saying like everybody who is a billionaire has to be corrupt, but there's a lot of stuff out there.
I don't know, man. It's tough for me because you see people that are, you know, I very rarely see people that are super successful that don't at least have some sociopathic tendencies, and with that, you know, they overlook people. I mean, even Trump, that's another thing no one ever talks about. Think about how many people he screwed over in those business deals and construction companies during the 80s and 90s with those bankruptcies. So, you know, it's something that's not talked about much. It needs to be talked about more. But again, I don't think that the left has come at him legitimately. You know, we talked probably about a half a dozen things that I thought were legitimate problems with that presidency, and they're not even whispered about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, huge topics that we could talk about for hours on any like small detail of these things. And it's been good to get your perspective on it. And I want to thank you very much for being here. And yeah, I would definitely like to talk again and maybe do a deeper dive into some stuff like 9/11. So
I can't wait. Looking forward to it, Mick. And I'm going to get to my 3 to 7 videos a day over at youtube.com/InfoWarrior if you guys want to subscribe. And it's on a various amount of subjects, and I'm doing it my own way, and you're welcome to disagree with me. And as long as you're respectfully disagreeing with those in the comments section of myself, I'm always open to other opinions.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. And me too. All right. See ya.
All right. Thank you, Mick. I appreciate it. We'll talk again.